Communism killed more people in the 20th century than were killed by all of the wars in the 20th century.
Why are so many Americans suddenly embracing the idea of socialism and even communism? During the 2016 presidential primaries, many Americans supported and voted for admitted socialist candidate Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, another admitted socialist, won a New York City congressional district in 2018 by upsetting a 10-year incumbent. Sanders calls himself a democratic socialist, and Ocasio-Cortez is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. Unfortunately, most American supporters of Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez are unsuspecting of where socialism leads a nation. 100 years ago, Soviet Union leader Vladimir Lenin said, "The goal of socialism is communism." Today, do we really know what communism is? The BL's In Great Minds series will discuss communism in a 10-part series called Understanding Communism with Dr. John Lanchowski, president of the Institute of World Politics and former principal advisor to Ronald Reagan on Soviet affairs. He helped develop policies that contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Empire.
For the entire 20th century, never had a communist regime come to power on the basis of an honest, free choice of a democratically chosen election. It simply didn't happen. The only places where it happened, where people voted a communist government into power, were in one province of India and in the tiny little state of San Marino, which I challenge you to try to find on the map of Italy. And never was a communist regime elected by a free democratic choice. You know, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the great Russian author, said that the worst thing about living under communism was not the daily privations, standing in line for hours to get the basic necessities of life. He said the worst thing about living under communism was the daily force feeding of a steady diet of lies. And what are these lies? The lies are the party line. The party line, which has to be repeated by everybody, and you cannot dissent from it. These lies, this party line, constitutes the drum beating for soldiers marching. And why do soldiers march? Because you cannot have an effective military if every soldier decides to do whatever he wants to do. The soldiers have to take orders, they have to conform, they have to obey, they have to shed their individualism. Everybody in a totalitarian system, like the old Soviet Union and China today, has to march according to this drumbeat. And if you do not march, the sergeant will identify you as a nonconformist and will pull you out of the formation and punish you. Solzhenitsyn said, "When the lie fastens its claws around your neck, it isn't just a political act. It is an attack on your very human dignity." Remember, in the 20th century, which organizations in the United States became the most powerful anti-communist organizations? The trade unions. Because they also knew that under Marxism, trade unions were not free. They were not really representing the workers. And it was that case from the very beginning of the Bolshevik Revolution. I like to ask my students, can any of you name a single worker who was part of the Bolshevik Revolution leadership? A single one? I'll tell you who one of them was. A certain comrade Shliapnikov, okay? Nobody's ever heard of him. Well, shortly after the Bolsheviks seized power, Mr. Shliapnikov was protesting the fact that the Bolshevik regime was betraying the interests of the workers. And he set up a workers' opposition to Lenin's regime. What happened to him? He was shot, okay? That's what happens to genuine workers who are concerned about workers' rights and interests. Marxism-Leninism is a disease not of the working class, It is a disease, an ideological affliction of the intelligentsia. It is the triumph of materialism over any recognition that there is something transcendent about the human being. Communism killed more people in the 20th century than were killed by all of the wars in the 20th century. Does anybody know this? No, nobody. The teachers don't teach it in the schools. The professors don't teach it in the universities. But it's the fact. Do we want to be blackmailed and subjugated by such a tyrannical regime? Well, I don't, and most Americans don't, if they understand what the truth is. And most people in the world don't.
Communism and free choice. If you freely choose communism now, will you continue to live enjoying free choice later? That seems unlikely if we look closely at history. And while you're thinking about that, don't miss part 2 of the BL's In Great Minds series, Understanding Communism. Dr. John Lanchowski will look at arms control treaties and the communist strategy to gain advantage through those treaties. For the BL, I'm Rich Crankshaw with In Great Minds.